All right, what's up, everybody? Cool, cool. So my name is Louie. I work for Spore and have for a very long time now, and have been, you know, pretty much obsessed with mushrooms for the past like 13 years. And I'm on our marketing team, and I'm our events coordinator, and have been on the production team and done everything. We are really stoked to talk about log cultivation. It's my favorite thing. We're going to talk about how to choose the right log and mushroom species, using the right spawn, sawdust, plug spawn. Do you use grain spawn? I don't know. You're going to find out. How to drill them and insert the spawn and seal them properly, how to keep them, what to do to maintain the right conditions, where to place them, contaminants and pests. All of that is going to get covered today. And then, of course, if there are things that I don't cover or things you need clarification on, I'm here for a Q&A afterwards.
Hey everybody, I am so stoked to be here. It's inoculation time. Thank you for joining Spore today. My name is Louis Giller. I am our events coordinator, our educator, our co-host for a lot of our content, and I've been inoculating logs and doing many other types of mushroom cultivation for over a decade now, but I gotta tell you, this is my favorite. So today we're gonna be running through A to Z log inoculation. We're going to talk about the prep of the process. We're gonna do it right here together, and then I'm gonna tell you how you take care of it and how you get mushrooms for years off of this cool process. There are certain mushroom species that we know well that work well on these logs. Shiitake's the king. Shiitake is like corn. It's gonna work the best by far on logs. But mushrooms like lion's mane and oysters work really well too. And I want to give you the scientific name sometimes. So shiitake is Lentinula edodes, lion's mane is Hericium erinaceus, and the oysters are Pleurotus species, and there's multiple species there. And don't worry so much about the pronunciation, but scientific names are great and we should use them. But those three typically work the best and can be the focus today. So I want to talk about the first steps now to approaching log cultivation. And it takes planning. You've got to know what you're going to do well ahead of time. You may have to plan months ahead, just like with any garden. You need a plan. You need to know what seeds you're getting, for example. So with this in mind, you need to start with when, the big W, right? When. And think about this, the whole year as a circle, and spring is the beginning of that circle. Spring is when trees are waking up from their long slumber and they are putting energy into their leaves. That is the worst time to cut your logs or acquire your logs in some other way. That's the worst time because all the energy in the wood is going into making leaves. So you end up with less mushroom production over time. The logs can lose their bark, for example, faster, and it means they degrade faster. So from there, once you actually have leaves, the leaves are taking in sunlight and they're recharging that wood. So about, let's call it 6 weeks after leaf out, you start to get into a place that's like pretty decent for cutting logs, and it just gets better and better. And once you get to the fall, you're in a really great time to cut wood again. And then when things go dormant, you have that whole winter to cut logs. Things are going to vary based on what the season looks like where you live, right? Alabama is very different from Maine, and in a place like that, you have year-round production. But things still go dormant, and dormancy is really the best time. Generally, you want to focus on hardwood species. Forget about pine, forget about spruce. Those conifers are not suitable for this process in almost all cases. There may be some exceptions there. We'll get to that if we have time. But those have resins that can be really antifungal. The wood is softer and doesn't last as long. It's just not what our species like as food. You want to avoid like fruit trees. Ash is actually not a great tree for this. black locust, things that are known to be antifungal, not great trees, but things like oak, maple, beech, birch, willow, alder, poplar, those are all great, and you can grow most things on those. We have poplar today. This is a softer hardwood, and the oysters in particular love softer hardwoods, cottonwood, things like that. But so does shiitake. Shiitake will do super well on this. So I'm really, really happy to have this today. The species are going to come in two different forms. They're going to come in plug spawn or in sawdust spawn. Basically, that is the vegetative structure of the organism. You've got to remember the mushroom is just the fruiting body. That's something really important. I don't know who needs to hear this, but the mushroom is the sexual organ. It's very ephemeral, but the mycelium makes up most of the biomass, and what we're doing is basically grafting. When we introduce the spawn into the log, the mycelium is going to move throughout the whole log. It lives in there. We don't need to inoculate time after time after time. And if you haven't figured it out yet, that term inoculation is sort of funny that we use that term, but that's what we do, and that's what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna say inoculate. And so think in those terms, that I'm just introducing an organism to its new home. I want you guys to understand that it's a matter of scale, sort of. When you are just going to do 1 log, 2 log, 3 logs, maybe 10 logs, the best choice is probably plug spawn. And this is plug spawn right here. So plug spawn are just little hardwood dowels that are inoculated with grain spawn. And you can see the white stuff. That's the mycelium on there. This can be easily tapped into the holes that we're going to drill with a hammer. And it's a slower process, but it requires less and is just easier to do with a hand drill. It's better for fewer logs. If you're going to do a lot, if you're going to get a real log yard going, go with sawdust spawn. Sawdust spawn is just a more economical structure. It's faster to inoculate, and it's actually more nutritious because this is amended sawdust. It's not just hardwood like the dowels. It's sawdust plus extra nutrients, which makes it colonize even faster. So those are your 2 spawn types that you're going to be using today, and I hope you will use North Spore spawn. Here, let's go through these tools. And I started to allude to some of the tools that we're going to be using today. Obviously, our spawn is very, very important. If you are using this plug spawn, just use a hammer or a mallet. And you're going to, if you're using the sawdust spawn, sawdust, what are you going to do? You can't hold the sawdust spawn. It's going to crumble out of your hands. So to put it in the holes that we make, you need this injector tool. It's just a little plunger tool. You stab it into the spawn. Actually, I'll show you guys. I'm going to open this spawn. It's only going to make 1 log today, but to show you guys, we must do it. And so I'm opening this spawn. Oh yeah, there's that fresh spawn smell. I wish you guys could smell this. It's something else. So I'm stabbing right into it, and I'm going to create a plug, essentially. And I just sort of poop it out right into my hand, and I'm going to be injecting that firmly into the holes that I make. And that can be a very fast process. Okay, so that's the difference between plug spawn and sawdust spawn. Another difference, actually, is the bit that you will use. So for plug spawn, you're going to be using an 8.5 millimeter bit. And for sawdust spawn, you're going to be using a 12 millimeter bit. If you have just a regular long drill bit, like that comes with our log kit, that is a 5/16 bit, and that's going to be just for plugs. So these are specialized bits. These are made for log inoculation, like in Japan, and they actually vacate the holes, like they clear them out when you drill down. And so you can use these bits in a regular drill, but there's an adapter piece that can allow you to use them on a angle grinder. And I strongly encourage the use of an angle grinder. It's gonna make this way easier, faster, and actually hardwood is so dense that it really stresses a hand drill out, and you may burn out your hand drill. doing this with it's doable, and you're going to want to take it slow and not you can definitely do it without burning them out, but angle grinders make this 100 times easier. So moving on from spawn, now we're going to go to wax. I have a really well-loved old wax melter here. It's a crock pot. And the older ones really do work better than the newer ones, I've found. And this has inoculated a lot of logs, this messy thing. And what I have in here is granulated paraffin wax, basically. This is like food grade, really, really good stuff, really flexible, it holds its heat well. The reason that we put the wax on is to hold in moisture. It's to hold the spawn in place. It's to protect it from contaminants. So we also have these wax daubers. This is just a wool dauber here. Wait, I don't want to drip a bunch of wax. Just a wool dauber here. And I often add a twisty tie or a little bit of wire at the end so that it can loop over the edge of my crock pot and not fall in the wax. But with this, it soaks up a bunch of wax and you can dab onto your injection sites. I have some safety gear here, gloves that I may or may not use. I have some hearing protection, up to you. And of course, I've been wearing my eye protection the whole time. This part, I feel like, isn't optional. The eye protection is important. You're going to be throwing bits of sawdust around. I feel like that's a really, really crucial thing. I honestly think I have like more dexterity with my hands without any gloves sometimes. And you might get a splinter, but let that choice be up to you. And the noise from an electric angle grinder isn't all that bad either, I think. I think the metal concerts that I go to probably are a lot worse for my hearing. And then you need to label your logs, guys. Your logs can be labeled in any way that you want. But this is a longer term process, and you may not remember what you inoculated or when. And so create a label. These metal tags, these are often used for plants and trees, and they don't need to hold ink because you're engraving onto them. It's aluminum. And so you engrave with a ballpoint pen, put the species name and the date, and then nail it, or in my case, I'm using a staple gun, staple it onto the end of your log. Simple as that. You can do that before or you can do it after. We'll do it after. Let's talk about the log itself. Let's get to it, guys. We have cut log sections that are about 6 inches diameter and they're about 3 feet long. I consider that to be a perfect log size. But you can cut anywhere, between 4 inches to about 8 inches diameter and about 2 to 4 feet long. A really small log on the lower end of that spectrum, they're more likely to dry out. It's just like, it's not as much bang for your buck. I find this size, it fits nicely into my sawhorse, which I didn't mention actually. The sawhorse, it's a very important tool. You can do this right on a table though, of course, but any kind of sawhorse works. This is a really cool little setup we've come up with where we have this DeWalt sawhorse, and this model has these 2 bars and a space in between, but it's totally adjustable and actually works really great and is very mobile. So I love this system. But let's talk about inoculating now that I've given you an idea of why my log is the size it is. So I'm starting with my 8.5 millimeter bit, and this is for plug spawn. So I'll get this plug spawn ready. And I'm gonna drill in a diamond pattern. Each hole is gonna be about 6 inches apart, and then each row is gonna be more like 3 or 4 inches apart. So it's sort of offset lines, and it ends up making sort of a diamond. And it doesn't need to be super, super exact. Just use your fingers, and you wanna start 1 or 2 inches from the edge. Never start your angle grinder while touching the wood. You need to let the motor rev up, and once it does, it'll go in like butter. But if you start it while touching the wood, it's gonna go, and it's gonna get stuck in the log, and that can be a real pain to get out. So you wanna push in and up, firmly and feet planted, you know, safe, and get it going. See how easy that was? I mean, really, it's like butter. So look at how fast I can do this. I'm gonna go all the way down. So now, let me show you what it looks like to inoculate these and actually introduce the organism. Very simple, like this. Boom. And so I'll have some of these spilled out on the table. Once plugs are colonized, sometimes people worry about contamination at this point. It's good to have washed your hands and washed your tools, sprayed them down with a little bit of alcohol, but contamination risk is pretty low at this stage because things are already colonized and your wood is fresh and healthy. Healthy wood. If you notice any other mushrooms growing on trees and looks like something might be wrong there, and that certainly takes some learning and some vocabulary, you know, for the for tree species. But if you notice something off with the wood, it may not be the best candidate for this process. You really want fresh, young, healthy trees. So I'm going to inoculate there. You can get out some anger here. Definitely is a cathartic process. All right, my friends, I'm done with a line of plug spawn, and I think from here I'm gonna switch to sawdust spawn. It's my preferred method. It's a little faster. I have a ton of it. So I want you to check out this beautiful sawdust spawn before I start mangling it. Look in there, it's just perfect. It's just waiting for a log to make a new home of. And I wanted to mention a little bit more about the inoculation tool. There is that initial investment with sawdust spawn. You're gonna need that different bit, you need the adapter, and you need the inoculation tool. If this is something that you're gonna do at any scale or even year after year, I really recommend investing in these tools and using sawdust spawn. We sell them as a trio and we make it easy. I think it's like $100 for the inoculation tool, the sawdust spawn bit, and the adapter. And that stuff will last. These are really well made. So I will begin in drilling holes in my diamond pattern, but I need to switch bits. So I'm holding down this button here to make it kind of stop so that I can create some tension. Just unscrewing the adapter. And I've got the 12 millimeter right here. All right, that's snug. So as I go, I'm going to shift the log just a little bit each time so that I'm making sure to have a good angle on my next line. So yeah, that's another advantage of heavier logs. You can sort of pull in and out of them without moving the log. As bits get a little bit older, you may get a little bit more stickiness, and bits could potentially be sharpened or perhaps oiled. Different wood is going to behave differently with that. Once you get comfortable with this, as you see me doing, you can use just one hand, and it isn't very hard, and you feel more stable and more safe doing it that way. Now we inoculate. You may want to put your spawn into like an old coffee can, an old paint can, something with a hard bottom so that you don't end up breaking the bag and spilling spawn everywhere. That's definitely something that's happened to me before. As you stab into the bag, you may stab through the bottom. I'm not going to be using this whole bag today, so I'm not really concerned about that, but it's something to think about. You may want a container for your spawn. And here we go. Firmly press down. Hold it in place. And then I often follow it up with a little press of the finger. Sometimes it's not super necessary, but you want spawn to be sunken a little bit into the hole, because then the wax can really cover it. If there's material mountaining out of the hole, it can get knocked off easier. And then you put wax on, but it still just can fall off and expose the spawn, and the spawn can fall out. Yeah, that's all working out real nice. Perfect, perfect. So again, you'd rather have a little bit less spawn than a little bit more. And I'll just kind of go backwards. Think about how cool it would be to make a inoculation table and use wheels where these brackets are. Do it. Make them. Show us pictures. With a team of people, honestly, the inoculation is typically the bottleneck, but with a team of people, you can go really fast. Me and like one other person in an afternoon, when you're really cruising and you've gotten good at this, you could do 50 logs in an afternoon. So if I just left it as is, the plugs may stay in. It's possible that they would do okay, but the sawdust spawn would fall out and is just really susceptible to predation for sure. Little bugs will burrow in there and stuff. So we got to give it some level of protection. We want our wax to be really well melted. If our wax is not melted enough, it will not adhere well. It'll be like cloudy and it'll just glop on there. If logs are really wet and are really cold, that can sometimes cause a problem. But it's really, if your wax is like smoking hot, you're gonna have the best experience with it, but you don't wanna get burned. So be really, really careful, make sure it's on a stable surface, and make sure you're not losing your stuff in the wax and having to dive in there. So that's why, again, I like to have wire so I can hook stuff around the rim. So I'm gonna take my little dauber, make sure it's saturated. Also make sure that you're not wearing any clothes that you mind getting some wax on. This can be a messy process, and the wax in particular can get on stuff. So we cover our table with some cardboard, cover the workspace with some protective thing, a tarp or cardboard, unless you're just outside, then don't worry about it. But this part can be drippy and messy. So now I am going to dab, dab, dab. I'm not going to scrape. I'm not painting. I'm dabbing. This thing is very saturated with a lot of wax, and if you just do a little tap, maybe 2 or 3 taps, you can do a whole line with one dip in the wax. You can do a whole line. See that? So I'll do a line, and then I'll dip it again, and I'll rotate it, and now I'll dab down the line. Now I'll dip again, rotate, and you know what? A lot of times it's impossible to have logs that are in like perfect condition. Sometimes they get dinged up when they're cut. Sometimes they even are lifted and moved around using like a forklift or something like that. If you have really, really damaged logs, you probably don't want to use them at all. But a little bit of damage, like this log has just like a little nick right here, I might cover that with some wax just to protect it, reduce moisture loss, just to give that a little bit of sealant, you know? That's a really nice thing to do. Some people historically have waxed the ends of their logs, and there may be situations where you want to wax the ends of your logs. I don't recommend it in most circumstances. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of wax. If you live in a place that gets enough rain and you have a decent environment, if you can give it the attention that it needs, the log, which ideally shouldn't be a lot, they'll be fine. you don't need to wax the ends of your logs, because not only are you sealing moisture in, you're sealing moisture out. So I really don't recommend that. So we've done it. Our log is inoculated. Congratulations. Now we got a label. This is important. So I have a label right here. This label says LE3, Lentinula edodes 3. That's what I'm labeling it, because I know that that's the code that North Spore uses. You could just write shiitake. You can write whatever you want so that you know what it is, and depending on the species, and then the date. And I often leave some space for tallies, because every time it fruits, I might, if I'm being diligent, make a tally on the log so that I know how many times it's fruited for me. Give you an idea of what it's done for you and the lifespan of the log. If it needs to be cycled out, you want to know what it's done for you. So I'm going to staple that in there. All right, that log is done. I can set that log up here for now, but if I were doing this in my backyard, I might set it on a pallet or up against a tree or elsewhere. Now it's time to talk about that. So let's talk about proper storage and incubation and all of that great stuff. Let's say I've made 20 logs. A bag of sawdust spawn can do about that for you. This bag here of 100 plugs can do about 2 to 4 logs. So again, 20 logs with this. That's a lot of logs. That's an afternoon of work. That is going to produce a ton of shiitake mushrooms for you, or lion's mane or oyster or chestnut, or whatever you're doing. But shiitake is really the cash crop. So we want to keep our logs moist. That's like number one. So we want them in a shady spot. We want them low to the ground. Conifers are a great area. Like, we're not using those conifers as our wood, but they are still our friends in this process. So under like white pine, under spruce, under hemlock, those conifers are going to provide shade, and that shade never leaves. They keep that shade for the whole year because they don't lose their leaves. And they often have pretty open understories. So keeping your logs in an area like that is perfect. Nice and low to the ground where it's humid, up off the ground, because the ground can be a surface where the logs can rot, and there could be contaminants that could be introduced. So you want to be just off the ground on some bricks, on some sacrificial wood, a pallet. Pallets are great. I love pallets, especially because they'll have grooves, and you can kind of set your bottom layer in those grooves and then build a little bit of a tower. Or you can do a dead stack. There's multiple ways to stack. We'll talk about that in a second. I want you guys to understand that direct sunlight is bad. Not just because it dries things out immediately, but it's sort of counterintuitive. If you get a lot of wet and then dry, wet and then dry conditions, you get more cracking, you get more bark loss, and you actually get more contamination from things like trichoderma that we're going to talk about. So you want stability is what you're really looking for, and there's ways that you can really enhance that. But if you have the right environment, which is most of like the East Coast and Midwest, the woods are going to be humid. They're going to prevent a lot of wind. They're going to prevent a lot of sun. Right on the ground, on a pallet in the woods, you're going to have success. Shiitake can be upwards of 95% successful on healthy red oak. Red oak being the gold standard for shiitake. White oak being great too. All oaks work very, very well. I hope that message comes across, but if you want to ask more about location, ask away later. Watering and moisture management. All right, this is really important. When you place your logs, think about placing them near a stream, or think about placing them where a hose can reach. If they're in your garden, you might want to spray them down, especially during the hottest times of the year. You shouldn't have to do it much. And also, you spray down the bark, it doesn't do that much. Logs don't absorb moisture through the bark. They absorb moisture through the ends. And if you spray that down, it helps. It reduces moisture loss. It cools them down a little bit, but it doesn't do a ton. They really need to soak water up. And so a dunk is really how you're going to hydrate your logs. And this is, I think, an appropriate time to talk about force fruiting. Now, I think it is. Yeah, I'm going to get to force fruiting in a second. That's a really, really important concept. But I was getting to this earlier. One of my favorite tools for mushroom cultivation is burlap or agricultural cloth. It does many things for you, but it's going to provide that shade and wind block. And so covering stuff with burlap or ag cloth, especially logs, is really, really beneficial for maintaining consistent conditions, and your logs are going to be happier for it. It also has, it can be a barrier for pests, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more coming up. Yeah, all right, so expected colonization times is now what I want to cover, because that's all I want to say about moisture, besides, I guess, giving you the percentage that you're really going for. No. I want to say something else. You want to keep logs above about 50% moisture. Sometimes you can just lift them up and do that good old lift test and be like, does that feel like a hydrated log or does that feel too light? The mycelium will die if your logs get too light. You can look at the ends of your logs and you can see, are they really cracked? Look, there's no cracks on the, oh, that's the wrong, look at this side. There's no cracks on this wood, and that's really good. If you have a crack and you can fit a quarter into it, it's really bad. It starts to mean that your logs are way too dried out. And so you can spray them down or you can do a dunk. I don't care what species you've got. You can put them into a tub of water, a stream, a trash can, a trough, whatever you got. Another way to test moisture is with a moisture meter. A lot of people test firewood using these things. You can get a really nice one for a few $100. You basically put prongs up against your wood and it's going to tell you the moisture internally. That's very, very effective. You can also cut a slice off your log, weigh it, and then bake it, and then weigh it again. And that difference in weight is the moisture. And that can tell you basically do that on one log and it's probably going to be fairly representative of your whole stack. So that can be done throughout the season and that can tell you a lot about what you're working with. Initial moisture is super important. Those first few months as you're colonizing are really going to dictate a lot of success, because as the mycelium gets more biomass, it has more survivability. It has more storage, things like that. So now, my friends, we are going to talk about signs of successful colonization. This part's kind of tough. You have to have a little bit of faith at this point, because sometimes you really don't see anything. Colonization times typically take between about 8 to 12 months in my experience of growing time, but they can take longer. They can take up to 2 years, especially with certain species that are weaker colonizers. But shiitake, if done right in a log this size, in a food source it likes, if kept moist, usually within 12 months, I'm seeing fruit. Oysters may go a little faster. Softer wood is going to be easier for the mycelium to chew through, and it's going to colonize faster. So you just may not see it moving throughout the wood. How would you? There will be mycelium on the ends of the logs sometimes. If things are really moist and it's very well colonized. That will almost always happen eventually, but sometimes logs will be like ready to fruit, but even though they're not really showing on the ends of the logs. That may happen later as it just continues to consolidate. And the reason for that is I want you to think about how the very ends of the logs are just going to be the driest. And so it may be, the mycelium may have moved right up to it, it just isn't on the face of it because that's the driest surface. Hope that makes sense. That's just like not quite where it'll be unless it's got really, really good conditions. But that is what you would hope for. Look for cracking, but also just make some assumptions. Know that if you have followed these things correctly and conditions are okay, and you've been on top of it, that it's going to be colonized and it's going to be ready to fruit in about a year. That's my rule. So natural fruiting versus force fruiting. I've mentioned force fruiting a few times now. Natural fruiting, you just let it go. Guys, what have we done here? We have created a rotting log in the woods. That's what we've created. You can make this thing, lean it up against a tree, and let it go. And it will colonize and it will fruit for you when it feels like it. It will fruit for years. And after a nice big rainstorm, it's going to produce mushrooms for you. That's often the trigger. But if you want to have more control and you want to get the most out of your logs, you can do what's called force fruiting. And shiitake are remarkable because they have been selected for hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe as long as 1,000 years. They've been selected for their traits. And one of the things they've been selected for is this ability to be commercially viable, the ability to be predictable. And so you can take your log and you can dunk it in nice cold water for about 24 hours. I would say 12 to 48 max. And that shock of that cold water and that hydration will tell the mushrooms to fruit almost every time with shiitake. It's really great. And you can do that every 6 to 8 weeks with shiitake. And that just makes it a crop that you can expect. All species will benefit from the hydration, and they may grow if they are shocked like that, but they may not. And so most other species kind of are on their own flow, and nature will dictate a lot of the time when they grow, with fluctuations in temperature and whatnot, much harder to control outside. But shiitake can be force fruited. That is remarkable. Think about this scenario, guys. You have 80 logs, right? You could, and I mean, that's like, now we're talking an enterprise, but 80 logs, you could fruit 10 a week. And by the time you're back to the group 1, it's been 7 weeks. And so you're ready to do it again. You get me? So you could have this continuous cycle and have mushrooms fruiting every week. You could do 1 a week and have 8 logs. You know, I mean, that's what we're talking about here, and makes shiitake so freaking cool. Let's see. Harvest. Oh my goodness, we're already talking about harvesting. So after about a year, maybe your mushrooms have grown on their own. That's great. If they've grown on their own, harvest them and start your force fruiting cycle then. Or just if you're at about 12 months and the time of year is right, if we're above freezing and the crocuses are blooming and stuff, it's time to start force fruiting, and they will likely produce for you, and then you can start that 6 to 8 week clock. Once the mushrooms start growing, they're often going to appear out of the holes that you've made, but not always. They can appear at the ends of the logs. They'll find other little cracks, especially over time. But they're going to often fruit out of these holes because that's the path of least resistance, and it's the path of mycelial density. And so your mushrooms are going to appear, and they'll grow in about a week, give or take. It may depend on strain a little bit. It may depend on the weather, but they'll be at full maturity in about a week. You're going to want to keep an eye on them. Harvesting a little younger is better than older. Younger, there's less time for predation. Older mushrooms will get bugs and things like that. You want to pick the mushrooms before the caps flatten out. The cap edge should be turned over. And there shouldn't be mold growing on it or it shouldn't look pithy or sad. But you want to definitely gain a vocabulary for what these mushrooms look like fresh and in their prime. And the stems of shiitake in particular are not something you're just going to fry up and eat. They're too woody. You can make stock with them, and they're great. Very little shiitakes you can eat the stem, but mostly you're going to be slicing right at the bark line. I don't recommend ripping shiitakes off because you can rip bark off with them. I recommend having a little scissors or a trusty sharp knife and just cutting the mushrooms off and throwing them into a basket. They should be put in the fridge right away in a paper bag or some breathable container. And then they can be dried and they can be pickled, and you can do all sorts of wonderful things with them. Expect 1/4 to 3/4 pounds of mushrooms. 1/4 to 3/4 of a pound, excuse me, of mushrooms per flush on a log like this. So you can get a lot of mushrooms. It's incredible how many. I mean, this log is heavy. It's going to produce a lot of food. You can get a ton of biomass conversion from this wood directly to food over the lifetime of the log. Now, the lifetime of the log can be, usually prime production is about 5 years. Softer woods is going to be a little less, harder woods is going to be a little more, but mushrooms may be coming out of those logs for way longer than that. 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10 years. The nice hardwood logs will still be producing a few mushrooms here or there. But those first 5 years are really the best, and that's the kind of rule we're talking about here is about 1 year per inch in diameter of log, give or take. So let's talk about, I talked about harvesting. Let's talk about preventing contamination. Right. So starting with healthy wood is really, really important. Making sure that your conditions are optimal and stable is another really great thing that you can do. We have numerous types of contaminants that we can get. The first thing you might see is other mushrooms and molds. You're almost never, I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen like other big fleshy mushrooms that would be anything like a shiitake or anything like lion's mane or anything like oysters growing off my logs. Never happened. But I've seen Bulgaria, equinans, Bulgaria something. That's the genus. And that's this black bubbly stuff that will grow on logs. I've seen trichoderma. I've seen turkey tail. I've seen all sorts of other little crusty shelf-like mushrooms. And some of those things like Bulgaria and trichoderma, all is not lost if you see that. Those things can be overcome. They will go away. Your shiitake or whatever you have there can outcompete them. The same goes for turkey tail, but sometimes not. That's definitely not a great sign. It is competing for nutrients. It's competing for moisture. And so those things can spread to other logs. You may want to, at the very least, isolate those logs and monitor them much more closely to see if they are going to produce for you. They may, but they may not. And if they are not, then they are firewood. So those are kind of the moldy contaminants. Then you have critters. The mushrooms themselves can get thrips or pleasant beetles or slugs, for example. Slugs are a big one. Slugs love mushrooms. I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, I swear, it was a super wet spring, and I swear every mushroom I found in the woods had a slug on it. There was slug damage on everything. And you know what? As mushroom people, we have to deal with a little bit of slug damage or a little bit of bug damage. And we're going to eat the mushrooms anyway. So don't be a perfectionist here. Find what's acceptable to you and understand that you can clean the mushrooms. You're going to cook them, and a little bit of damage is okay. But we want to prevent as much of it as we can. So coming back to that agricultural cloth, cover your stuff, weigh down the edges. You could use shade cloth, and it does triple duty. It's going to prevent those things from getting in there and nibbling away at your mushrooms. That'll prevent larger mammals too. You won't get grazing from squirrels and from deer as much. They like mushrooms as well. So ag cloth is great. You could use, if really you're seeing slug damage as your primary problem, you could have chickens going after them. You can have Sluggo or other similar products that target slugs specifically. If you're close to harvest, you could use diatomaceous earth, which is powdered diatoms. It's like little sharp things. They're not known to work great. This is not super practical, but if you really want to give the mushrooms right as they're fruiting, just for a few days, a nice advantage and be protected, you can put down diatomaceous earth, and slugs are not likely to cross the diatomaceous earth because it doesn't feel good. They don't like it. Or use salt, right? If you really wanted to, or gravel. People use copper, all these different things to fight slugs. But I just find that the most practical solution is going to be ag cloth. Truly, is going to be a fruiting blanket, as it's sometimes referred, or as I like, burlap. I think burlap works really great, and you can get a few years out of it, and it's biodegradable. When you stack them up initially for their incubation of about a year, they can be in just a dead stack. That's okay, where you've just sort of stacked them like firewood. You could also stack them in sort of perpendicular layers, crib stack, sort of like, 4 logs and then 4 logs and then 4 logs and 4 logs, or 5, nice and tight, right? So that they're conserving moisture and conserving space. You could also do like a low lean, so they're leaned up and they're close to the ground. Now, when you're fruiting, you're going to want to switch them into more of a fruiting position, leaned up against a tree, leaned up in a teepee formation. There are several other ways to lean them up. And this is all about how much effort you want to put in. You can switch them from resting to fruiting, or you can just put them in a formation that's acceptable for fruiting and just leave them there. That's totally cool too. But if you want to get the most out of them, you will move the formation and you will do a force fruiting regimen? Doesn't matter. So it looks like we've covered just about everything that we had slated for today, but there's a lot more to this, guys. I have a lot more information that I could share. I'm sure there are things that I missed, so please, send your questions our way. But we have a lot of other resources that can be helpful to you and maybe answer your questions. We have a robust YouTube, and we're always putting out new content there. We've got a great Instagram where we're always sharing interesting information. There are walkthroughs right on our website, and all of this information and all the charts and stuff lives on our website. We have a Substack with really interesting information if you really want to dive in deep and become a real amateur mycologist and part of our community. So thank you. I'm really stoked that you took part in this class and hope you got a lot out of it. And I hope you become a mushroom farmer and have a lot of fun. Thanks.
Let's get to the Q&A because I know that we are going to go over time. So how's it going, Lou? You ready?
I'm doing great. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. So the first one is just a comment that you missed the upper edge for log diameter. So the upper edge for log diameter is typically 8 inches. So the range is from 4 inches to 8 inches. If you're going to do a larger diameter log, just make sure that it's something that you can carry, that's something that you're comfortable with. I mean, if you want to do a huge tree, you could inoculate that. You could inoculate just a down tree, and not touch it. But you got to recognize that it's just going to take that much longer to colonize, and you can't move it anywhere or do anything with it. The other thing that I want to mention about diameter is if you have a large diameter, let's say you have 10-inch, 12-inch diameter wood, not uncommon at all, you could use that for the totem method or pillar method, as it's sometimes called. That method is wonderful and really, really cool looking in a garden. You basically make a birthday cake out of your logs. You do shorter sections, larger diameter, and you smush sawdust spawn in between. That's a cool method that we really didn't go into a ton here. We'll go into it more in depth I think in the gardening class next week, that's really where that kind of thing I think is more applicable. I don't want to spend too much time on it now, but look into that. We have more information on our website as well if you want to learn how to make pillars. Okay, let's see. Several questions. How to source logs? That's a great question. So sourcing logs can be a real problem for people. I used to do farmers markets in Boston, and it was always really interesting to me that I would mention log cultivation to them, and they would be like, where the hell am I going to get a log? And even in a very urban environment, there are parks, and there are parks with hardwood trees, and you have a parks department that is always cutting wood. So the first place to check might just be your town or city, your municipal government. They have a parks department. They have groundskeepers and arborists on staff that are always cutting stuff. And so you can reach out, and you may even be just doing them a favor by getting their logs. And the same can be said for landscaping companies, and arborists that are just cutting stuff. And a lot of times, arborists see it as like a nice side gig. They'll charge you a few bucks a log, and they might even just deliver it right to your door. My dad was once walking down the street. I think he was walking the dog, and he saw some guys cutting a maple and was like, hey, can I have those logs? Boom, he had logs to inoculate in the backyard. So yes, you want the cutting of those logs to line up with a good time to inoculate, but hey, convenience is convenience, right? And they'll still work. Is it already too late? Well, that depends on where you live. Here in Maine, it's definitely not too late. And in like the upper Midwest, it's not. Now is a great time. Yes, maybe the sap is flowing, but you haven't had leaf out yet at all. And so there's still a lot of energy locked up in that wood. So now's a great time to cut. We just had some logs cut. Those logs, we had maple and poplar, hard maple, sugar maple, and the poplar cut. I have like 20 of each sitting out in the backyard. They were just cut, and now I can let them hang out for a little bit. I'm in no particular rush to inoculate them. Further south, if you're really seeing the leaves budding out, if it's a very convenient time for you, go ahead and cut. But otherwise, you may want to wait about 6 weeks after leaf out so that the leaves can do some of their work recharging the wood. And then it's okay, but it gets better and better and better until trees are dormant again and they're able to just, and all that nutrition is locked up. The fall is a great time to inoculate because you have wood that is very nutritious. Plus, you have time for colonization before winter sets in. This is very different if you're in like Alabama or something, by the way. You may just have year-round possibilities there. It's hard to speak to exactly where you're coming from. Sawdust is faster than plugs for a few reasons. One, sawdust is supplemented. We supplement the sawdust with soy hull, so it's more nutritious than plugs. So it's going to add more food and energy to the log, and so that's one reason it goes faster. But besides that, it's not really that it colonizes much faster. It's just that inoculating is faster, and it's faster if you have the right setup. You're just going bam, 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 versus like putting the dowel in the hole and kind of putting them all in. It ends up being a more economical and faster process. Maybe it's not drastic for you, but the sawdust is definitely cheaper. So that's another reason. I certainly find the sawdust to be a faster, more efficient, and less frustrating process. The one thing I will say, and then I'll move on, I promise, is that plugs are cool because they don't fall out. Whereas sawdust is more easily dug out by predators, and the wax is super important for that purpose. Whereas plugs, like if you're in a really moist environment, you may not even really need wax at all. That's a little secret. You probably have pretty high success if things are moist without wax at all because they're wedged in there really good. and they're not going to be pulled out. Okay, so in the reading we've done, it seems like you suggest 4 to 6 diameter logs, but the videos seem to be 6 plus. Does 6, 8, 10, etc. really make much of a difference? So this is just a question going back to the log diameter. Use logs that you're comfortable lifting. I think a 6-inch diameter log that's about 3 feet long is perfect. It stacks well. It's easy to manipulate. It produces well. The other thing, I have this like goat trough in my backyard, and 3-foot logs fit into it perfectly. 3.5 foot, and I need to lean them up out of it, or like put them vertical, and they don't get fully submerged. So think about what you're going to dunk them into as well, and how that relates to their size. Yeah, so do what's comfortable for you, but you want to be efficient with this. Very small diameter logs dry out faster, and you've put all this spawn into them, and they're going to produce less. So there's a balance to be found there, and I've given you my opinion on it. Also, storage and harvest. Yeah, freeze drying mushrooms is amazing. Freeze drying is cool because when you freeze dry them, it's like you just picked them. Like I've been given freeze dried mushrooms, and it's like, holy crap, that looks like it just got picked. Their texture, and they can't really be rehydrated the same way. They're great for powdering, perhaps, but drying them is easy in a good dehydrator or in an oven. My oven has a dehydrator setting. You can eat, and storing them in like well-sealed gasketed jars with you can even get vacuum jars that are really cheap, and storing them with desiccant packets, food grade desiccant packets, the little silica beads, is really great. And you can keep that stuff for, oh boy, I've probably had mushrooms in my cabinet that were 2 years old and tried them, and they were fine. Things like black trumpets and shiitake and hen of the woods. Whether it's just jars or vacuum sealing, you just want to be a little careful with, because sometimes the mushrooms will have sharp edges, and as it sucks onto the mushrooms, it'll poke little micro holes. So be careful. That's just an experience I've had. It usually works really well. Freeze drying is great, but a freeze dryer is going to cost you, like, I don't know what they cost, $3,000 most people. So if you have it, great, play with that. You probably learn more than I know very quickly. I've tried 2 times with shiitake logs, but for now never got any crops. Here are my questions. Nicola, how long should I wait after cutting down the trees and making the logs? You don't need to wait at all. There is information out there, and this is sort of a little bit contentious still, that you should wait 2 weeks. If you do that, that's fine. There may be a small benefit. If you do it right away, I think that's also fine. I think that's the best thing to do, is just do it as soon as you can. Just get going. There may be a difference in species, right? Different log species may need different amounts of time, and there just isn't good information on that. There's some for like red maple that you may need to wait quite a while, but bottom line is you should just do it right away, and the success rate can be like 95%. So don't wait. I heard it's better to wait some time because the tree's immune system is still active. Yeah, and let me just think about what's going on here. You've put the plug in. The plug is alive. Even if there's an immune system in the tree, all that's going to do is it's not going to hurt the plug. It may prevent it from penetrating very deeply, but the plug's in there. So like once that immune system dies back, then the plug will attack. You know what I mean? So as long as there's moisture there, it may just take a little bit longer, but the difference is really marginal. But it's okay to wait 2 weeks. Totally. I wouldn't wait any longer than like a couple months, maybe a month if you're in the middle of the summer. And in the winter, you can wait even longer. You can let logs sit around in a snowy, under some snow on a pallet for 3 months in the winter. If you cut in January and you're not going to inoculate till March or April, that's fine, because there's not a lot of microbial stuff happening. Everything's frozen up. You don't have to, not a lot of moisture loss, as long as you keep them sheltered from wind. Wind in the winter will totally steal moisture. So as long as they're kind of like hunkered down, they can be okay. All right, backing up a little bit. Moisture is clearly important. Is it possible to overwater or keep them too moist? Yeah, it is. If they are drowning, the mushrooms need air. The mycelium needs air. So if it is not breathing and draining regularly, you will have a problem. So you wouldn't want to leave them in a trough for a week, for example. Things will start fermenting. That'll be bad news. But I mean, let's say you wanted to be an overachiever and you wanted to dunk your logs or do a force fruiting every month with your logs just to make sure they're super hydrated. That'd be fine. I mean, even every week, I don't think it would like kill them or anything, as long as they get the chance to dry out a little bit. So it's really the logs will find their correct carrying capacity of moisture, and typically you don't want to fall below 50, maybe as low as 40% moisture. Maybe they're probably done for at that point. And you don't really want or need your moisture to be higher than about 70 or 75%. That's general for substrate of all kinds. And how much time should the log sit after it's been harvested? I just covered that. I hope that you picked up on that and it was helpful. Do you know of anyone setting up warbler sprinklers in the storage area to keep them wet? Absolutely. Set up sprinklers. So you can set up drip tape. People do all sorts of different watering systems for logs and for gardening in general, right? So I've seen people, they set up high tunnels or low tunnels and set up sprinkler systems or misting systems or drip tape. And yes, that can totally help. You got to remember that logs don't absorb moisture well through the bark. They're absorbing it through the end, and you just splash some water on there. It's not doing that much. It helps, but it really needs to be sustained water. So a misting system is great, or just dunk them more often. But yeah, people do set up misting systems. I have been a busy / lazy at times and haven't set one up in our backyard yet. We probably will for some experiments soon. They may not be log experiments. We may try and grow some morels, guys, and we may set up some a misting system in a low tunnel for those morels. Might be worth it. All right. I know fresh cut is wood, but what's the upper limit for freshness? Isn't it 1 to 2 months? Is too fresh bad? So I went over that. I don't think too fresh is bad. I think if you cut and inoculate the same day, that's fine. Red oak, it'll love it. Sugar maple, totally fine. Like I said, poplar, totally fine. But if you want to kind of like average out the all of the information that's out there, wait 2 weeks. It's not going to hurt too much, and it may help. We're in the Hudson Valley. So Hudson Valley, New York, plenty of rain, beautiful place to grow mushrooms. No leaf out, buds on maple trees. I would do it. I would do it now. I think it's fine. I mean, the maple's flowing, so like it's starting to get some of that energy going, but I would hop on it if you want to do it. Get that 20% off on our website, and you know, make some logs. They will work. And obviously trees move at different paces. Like even though maple's moving, like oak is not, you know, so you have more time. To control moisture during incubation, should I dunk the logs in water if precipitation is scarce, or sprinkle them with a hose every now and then? Look, when I'm out in my garden and I'm watering my garden, I spray down my logs, especially in the summer. I'll spray down my logs anyway because it's good. It's just like it's cooling them off. I have burlap a lot of times over them, shading them and keeping the wind off them, and the cool, wet, humid conditions underneath that burlap is great. So I'll do that when I water my logs, or when I water my garden, because I don't want to dunk more than I have to. I try to dunk every 6 to 8 weeks, like I said, and I don't feel the need to do it beyond that. And it's going to produce mushrooms and keep those logs hydrated for quite a while after you do it. Hopefully that makes sense. Colonization by the mycelium can happen even in freezing climates. Yes, it will slow down considerably and maybe stop. They go dormant in freezing climates like Maine, where we are. My zone is 5B now because we're pretty coastal, but Maine goes from like 3 to 6. We've got like a lot of zones here. And they will just go dormant until things warm up, and then they'll start colonizing again. If you cut trees and make logs in November, the colonization process will start in winter. Okay, so remember how I was talking about waxing the ends of your logs? This is a situation where you may want to bring logs inside for like a month, and waxing the ends of the logs may be smart just to keep that initial moisture in during that critical first month or two when it's getting established. And then after you're established, I would get those logs outside as soon as possible and just get them outside and cover them with snow or something. But you may want to, in that scenario, bring them inside a little bit if you're already getting freezing temperatures, but you've inoculated in the winter. I've seen people have quite a lot of success, kind of. There are these things called earth boxes, and it's like a planter with like a water reservoir, I think. But this guy, a customer of ours, used them to bring his logs indoors very successfully. It had sort of like a elastic cover on top, and he kept his logs in there over the winter, and he showed me them a few times, like sent pictures, and they were super well colonized. I mean, it worked really well. There is a risk that you'll get trichoderma. These are not sterile, these logs. So if they're kept super moist, you could just get mold. But it can definitely work. How low can the temp go in the fall before colonization stops? Once you get into the like low 50s, you're really not getting much colonization of shiitake. There are strains of shiitake out there that are colder weather strains that may push that limit a little bit. And oysters and things like namako, they love the cold and they'll totally grow in the 40s. So it will depend on what you're growing. So I would put the lower limit on almost anything into the 40s, the low 40s. I think I heard you say that sawdust has soy. Is that correct? I'm soy allergic and would have never thought of that. Yeah, you're going to want, if you're allergic to components of sawdust, of spawn, it's like celiac. People with gluten intolerance are always asking us, is this gluten free? And unfortunately, our spawn is not. Our spawn has wheat in it. But mushrooms cannot contain gluten. Not just don't, they cannot. But there could be cross-contamination, and that freaks people out. As far as the soy, it's the same situation. The soy is providing nutrients, but there's no soy in the mushrooms. So just because it's in the sawdust, I would be, it's not, you're not eating soy. You're eating mushrooms. It's just what was in the nutrition for them. So that really wouldn't cause you problems. And if you've eaten mushrooms without problems, I'm telling you, you've probably been eating mushrooms that were grown on substrate that likely had a soy nutritional component. It's very common, but it's not translating to the mushrooms. So you wouldn't have a problem. If just touching it is a problem, then yeah, you're just going to want to wear gloves and stuff. Is there an advantage to using beeswax instead of paraffin? Beeswax is great. It's like a more, I think, natural sort of holistic process or product because paraffin is petroleum based. But you're going to want to make sure that the beeswax isn't too flaky and is nice and bendable. And you could add a little bit of, I think again, a petroleum product, mineral oil, or other oils perhaps. That will thin out the wax because you want it to really coat in and be able to handle temperature fluctuations that'll cause flexing. Yeah. So beeswax is great. We have some. I have a bunch in my garage actually that I've been meaning to use. I've also used, again, talking about soy, I've used soy-based wax and it worked okay. The paraffin works the best in my opinion. What are the most likely reasons for unsuccessful attempts? Dude, probably the most common thing is people don't wait long enough and they throw their logs out. I'm serious. Like people are like, this never worked, and they just didn't wait long enough. Um, a lot of different species also just won't work. Sometimes moisture needed to be really steady, or they were outcompeted by another species. A lot of there's just a lower success rate. Let's call it a 75%. I'm just making an educated guess for lion's mane, and somewhere around there for oyster too. And it depends on the logs and whatever. But for shiitake, if you're keeping the log moist and it was a fresh, healthy log, 95% success. It's going to um, it's going to produce mushrooms. Now, you said you just got 2 mushrooms. That means it's colonized. Do a forced fruiting. Make sure it stays moist. They're going to produce out of that holes you made. Out of the holes you made, it's there. It's in the wood. If it produced any mushrooms, it probably just didn't have the moisture and the conditions. That's what I think. I actually just examined my logs that I inoculated 4 months ago for the first time. 80% of the grain spawn that I put in seemed to wash away. I added wax. So you used grain spawn. If you used grain spawn, actually, that's bad. That's why it's gone, because it's so attractive to pests. But if you use just sawdust spawn, your wax may not have sealed it very well. You really want hot wax, and you want it to be really, really well sealed. But even if you did everything right, it's not that uncommon for after 4 months, 6 months, 8 months for sawdust spawn to have fallen out. But it doesn't really matter, right? Because your log is colonized at that point. The mycelium has jumped off from the plug, and it's now moving throughout the wood. So it doesn't really matter that your holes are empty. Doesn't really matter. They'll get filled up with mushrooms and mushroom material, stem and mycelium when they decide to grow out of those holes. But the log is what's colonized after a month or two, and you don't need to worry so much about the plugs. We have a ton of diseased beech. This is really interesting. It has scab and something else. So beech all over the place is super diseased. It has these blisters all over, and it's actually caused by the combination of a bug, a beetle, and an introduced rust fungus. And it's pretty bad and makes them not live very long. I think it probably does affect the lifetime of your logs, but the logs can work. They can totally work. Diseased birch can work. That's the bottom line, but it probably affects the lifetime of them. It's worth trying them, totally. But that's a really interesting thing that's going on, and absolutely a use for them. There's a lot of young birch because they still reproduce. They just tend to die, and so you can use the young birch or beech. Not sure you answered the question about how fresh logs ought to be. Can a log be 3 months old? Yes, especially if it's been kept moist, but you start to take a little bit more of a risk. Does 5-year log life include the initial 12 month wait? That's a good question. No, it really doesn't. 5 years of production, 4 to 5, 4 for something like the softwoods, 5 for like shiitake is like common for really good production, and then it's going to peter out. Look, I was at a farm last year called Shady Grove in Maine, about, I don't know, 2 hours from us, if that. And he has been doing logs for like 15 years. He knows what works. And he uses birch a ton and loves birch. And even though birch is a softer wood, he's gotten shiitakes to produce on some of his logs for like 10 years. But yeah, they're gonna produce less and less over time. And if space and attention is at a premium, you're gonna cycle out those logs in favor of higher producing, fresher logs. So yeah, I would say that you should not count colonization in that timeline. Any suggestions about companies that sell sawdust spawn and can ship to Italy? I've purchased from Gluckpilze. Yeah, I've heard of that company. I was about to say that's the one I know that's like you said based in Austria, or I wasn't sure if it was Austria or Germany. I don't know of a lot of the European. Yes, there's the biggest one. probably the best known spawn company out of Europe is Mycelia, Mycelia, Mycelia. They are very well known and a large player in the industry and have a lot of do a lot of business in the United States. And yeah, I would check them, and if they can't help you, you know, they'll know who can. For sure. Mycelia. They're very well respected. And how does shipping time affect the ability of Spawn to colonize? I mean, is 4 to 5 days okay? Yeah, totally. You know, Spawn's pretty tough. When it's in a box and it's all taped up, it can't breathe very well. And so it doesn't want to be like that for very long. And if temperatures are extreme, especially heat, that can kill Spawn and has been known to. And so if you're going to ship this stuff in the summer, we have an option for insulated shipping, and I highly recommend it if it's going to go very far from us in Maine. But the stuff is fine. We do it every day in normal conditions where it's not normal, not extreme conditions. If it takes a week to get to you, the Spawn's fine. But you should take the tape off and open it up and let the filter patch allow the thing to breathe, and get it in a fridge to lower the metabolism, slow the metabolism down if you're not going to use it right away. All right. Well, good questions, guys. All right, Daryl, for oyster mushrooms, is growing on logs efficient when compared to straw bags? It's very different. It's straw. They rip through straw. Straw, you'll have a colonized straw bag in like 2 weeks and be producing mushrooms. It's a totally different scale. You know, it's a totally different timeline. You're getting mushrooms just in a few weeks. It's producing a few times, and then you're done with it. You know, whereas we're talking about years here with logs, with oyster logs. So it's efficient in that it doesn't necessarily take a lot of labor. You don't need more plastic. You don't need with straw logs. You're cranking through them, and you need a lot of plastic and you need a lot of spawn. With the logs, you make them, and it's the gift that keeps on giving, really. So they're both awesome. You're going to get more mushrooms. I guess the answer is it's more efficient to do straw bags. I mean, you're going to get far more mushrooms, and more farmers do that. They are doing, that's how North Spore started, was straw in buckets with oysters. And so more farmers are providing mushrooms to farmers markets and restaurants through indoor cultivation, for sure. But a lot of this is super viable for a hobbyist, and even viable for farmers and commercially. It truly is. It just depends on your situation and your market and things like that. Is there a benefit to soaking the plugs? No, you do not need to soak the plugs. They're hydrated, they're colonized. We soak them and sterilize them. Don't do that. Waste of time. Probably more detrimental than beneficial. Excellent. Thanks for sharing. Thank you, Nicola. You said about future classes, I will not be able to attend, but can I apply anyway and watch the recorded session afterwards? Yes, you can totally not show up to the live sessions when we do these classes. You can purchase it and you will get the recording, and we will give you a discount for doing multiple classes. On top of that, we have a new Substack, guys. I'm not sure you're familiar with what Substack is, but it's a really cool place where we can put a lot of cool content. And you can join that, and there'll be different tiers. And if you join our Substack, it can give you access to a lot of the educational information that we're going to be producing. So definitely subscribe to our newsletter to hear information about everything we're up to. That's kind of my number one suggestion. So thanks, guys. This was fun. I look forward to the next one. And please do reach out with questions as they arise. We want you to be successful here, and it really is one of my favorite things. And I can't wait to get out back and inoculate some poplar logs. Yeah, Nate just shared the Substack, so you can take a look at it. We've got a few things on it already, and we're gonna put a lot more. We've got so many cool ideas, and some things just they belong there for people that are really interested in diving into different topics of mycology, or maybe we would put like the full version of an interview, and that we put more of an edited version on YouTube, stuff like that, guys. Stuff that for those of you that feel a little nerdier with the mushrooms.
We'll also have like smaller group discussions, which is really exciting.
Yeah, we can do all sorts of stuff with it, guys. So, and give us suggestions totally of stuff that you want to see. But it's capable of a lot of different fun features and mediums.
Yeah, so I threw the URL for our Substack there. So if right now how we have it set up, like if you become a monthly paid subscriber or pay for the year, you'll get free access to our classes. So I'll be posting in there for paid subscribers like a voucher to go to classes for free, which is pretty cool. And we'll also be like adding all of the recorded sessions to an archive that you can also get access to, which is pretty interesting. Yeah. But I'm excited for like more tiny group discussions and one-on-one stuff because we haven't really found a way to do that before.
Yeah.
So.
We want to hear about how you're experimenting, what little differences you're doing, and what you're learning along the way. That helps us learn. I've learned so much more from our customers than I could have ever possibly learned from my own experience, just seeing what so many awesome people have done. That's just like totally true. And so we're going to have classes on all sorts of stuff, and we want to have conversation around it. So, keep in mind, if you want to learn how to grow indoors, if you want to learn how to use agar or make grain spawn, if you want to learn how to use a monotub or a boom room, which is our Martha tent, like indoor growing larger scale tent, we'll go through all that in the coming months.